Hi, I'm Rob Preston. I'm here again with William Lowe, and today we're going to do another road map segment. And tonight we're going to talk about how to avoid the sling trap. It's kind of a catchy title I made up for what we're going to talk about, and that's how, if you're a new survivor, how to not get into the sling trap if you get put into a sling because of your shoulder, and if you I've been in a sling for a while. We're going to talk a little bit about how to address it. So, William, you were going to start us off with why do so many stroke survivors end up in a sling? What's the theory and logic behind that?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll be happy to start us off. So I think that this is a really important topic to talk about because I think, in all my years helping stroke survivors, exchanging notes with stroke survivors in their recovery, as well as in my own personal experience as a stroke survivor, one of the things I've noticed that a lot of stroke survivors do, well, one of the mistakes that a lot of stroke survivors I've noticed do is this idea of depending on things which might have been helpful in the very early stages of their recovery, but may not be as helpful later down the line, further on in their recovery after stroke. And one of these things is the idea of using an arm sling to help support the weight of your arm. So typically in recovery after stroke, the first thing which physical therapists actually work on in a stroke survivor's recovery is helping to stabilize the shoulder. And the reason why physical therapists focus on helping to stabilize the shoulder in recovery after stroke is because what tends to happen when someone has a stroke is that their brain actually stops sending signals to certain muscles around the body. So, and this might be because some of these signals were completely lost or damaged because of the stroke, or or your brain just just hasn't been able to wake these signals back up. And and in most cases, for most stroke survivors, what tends to happen is that the brain stops sending signals to the muscles around the shoulder, which are responsible for supporting the weight of the arm. And what tends to happen in recovery after stroke is because your brain has just suffered a stroke and because your brain has forgotten how to send some signals, or some signals have been damaged because of your stroke, your brain is no longer able to support the weight of your arm. And now, because your arm by itself weighs about 6 pounds, what tends to happen for a lot of stroke survivors is the muscles around your shoulder, they're not strong enough to support the weight of your arm. And because of that, your arm can actually slowly detach away from your shoulder girdle or from your shoulder. And what tends to happen is that this results in something which is called shoulder subluxation, which is basically a fancy term to describe when your arm actually dislocates from your shoulder joint. And because of this, for a lot of stroke survivors, when they put their finger near their shoulder, they can actually feel they can actually poke their finger in because there's been a depression caused by the arm actually coming out of its socket because it's not able to be supported by the muscles around the shoulder, which typically do that job. So generally speaking, a physical therapist would aim to stabilize the shoulder because they want to prevent that from happening. And although this is done with good intentions, it can be quite detrimental down the line because initially a physical therapist would suggest to a stroke survivor to wear an arm sling to help support the weight of the arm. But if a stroke survivor keeps wearing that arm sling for, let's say, years on end, what tends to happen is that your brain actually gets conditioned to having the arm actually close to the body. And because muscles tend to be quite tight in recovery after stroke, years down the track, a lot of stroke survivors find that their arm is actually glued towards their body, and it's almost impossible to actually move their arm away from their body because one, their brain has been conditioned to sending signals to the muscles which use to bring that arm in, and it's never really been exposed to what it feels like to bring the arm away from the body, even though some of the muscles which are used to support the weight of your arm, they might be strong enough to do so. So this is dangerous because, for one, I mean, unless you're a fan of walking around the supermarket like this for the rest of your life, it's not going to be very good. And number two, when your arm is stuck to your body like this all the time, and your brain is conditioned to do that, because you weren't able to educate your brain from the very start, it actually limits your ability to actually use your hand in a lot of functional tasks or daily tasks which you would have typically done before you had your stroke anyway, because your brain hasn't learned how to overcome that tightness which is caused by the muscle which you use to bring your arm in close to your body. So that's basically why it's really important to be cognizant of how much you're really depending on the arm sling to actually support the weight of your arm. It can be good early on in your recovery, like I said, to follow the advice of your physical therapist and wear an arm sling to help support the weight of your arm, so that you actually avoid shoulder subluxation or your arm dislocating from your shoulder joint. But at the same time, you also have to be aware that it's very easy for your brain to get conditioned to doing things the easy way and rely on something external to help it do something which it might have done by itself before you had your stroke, which is supporting the weight of the arm by itself. And it's really important, I think, to really know in the early days of recovery after stroke, especially if you're a new stroke survivor, that when your physical therapist suggests that you wear an arm sling to maybe support the weight of your arm, that this is only a temporary measure. In the real recovery, which is teaching your brain how to actually support the weight of the arm by itself, that's more important. So I think the sooner you can teach your brain how to support the weight of your arm by itself, then you can actually avoid the trap of actually relying on something external to keep your arm up, and you can avoid getting into situations where, let's say years down the line in your recovery, let's say if you didn't know about the dangers of the arm sling, like I mentioned right now, you're stuck in a situation where your arm is actually close to your body, and it becomes impossible to actually use your hand in any functional activities, and also bring your arm actually away from your body. So that's basically everything I want to cover with regards to why it's important to really be aware of this idea of the arm sling, and why it's actually suggested by physical therapists in your early stages of recovery after stroke. And now, Ralph, you and I, we were having a discussion about this earlier. I was just wondering if you had any notes you wanted to share with the folks watching about your thoughts on arm slings and their use in recovery after stroke.
Sure. I know they're a danger. I think I only had one for a short period, and I didn't get any instructions about how long to wear it. So I think I started trying to move my shoulder as soon as I could. When I left the rehab hospital, I couldn't do much of anything with my shoulder. I couldn't get my hand was kind of stuck in my lap. I couldn't raise my hand off my thigh. But I got onto the whole thing about the shoulders early on, because in the rehab hospital, there was a volunteer who's an older guy who's since passed away, had 8,000 hours or something like that at the hospital, or 18,000 hours of volunteering. Anyway, came into the stroke group, and he had his arm was actually smaller, significantly smaller, and it was pinned to his chest. And when I saw that the first day, I thought, oh boy. And the psychologist who was running the group had Bill his name was Bill, tell his story. And the story was his wife nagged him first 10 years after his stroke, and he had some mobility, and she passed away, and he let it go, and it ended up like that. So there's also a danger of, if you don't do anything, of it's called posturing. So I knew about it, and it's not something you want to do. When there's certain stroke patterns, posturing is one of them. It'll keep going up and up and up, and you want to be able to break away from all the stroke patterns. So, I saw that like, I don't know, day 2 or 3 in the hospital. I just said, man, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to get on this shoulder. So I did, but I couldn't move like I said, I couldn't lift my hand off my lap. Of course, I'd yawn and my arm would go up and come back down, and I couldn't move it again. They'll prove to you that there's nothing wrong with your arm. It's a connection to your brain, but it's a reflex, something your brain just does automatically, and you can't really harness it. I've asked a number of people who said they experienced it, and nobody's been able to figure out how to do anything with it other than say my arm's nothing wrong with my arm anyway. So one of the first things I did, of course, if I wanted to get that arm anywhere, I have to like grab my sleeve. In the summer, it'd be up here. So I'd grab my sleeve, and every time I did that to move my arm somewhere, I would try and think about it because I got my hand working off of the mental practice. So I did that. I just looked into the whole thing of thinking about moving when I moved and trying to help the brain make connections. Let's see, one of the very first things I did was, you said you limit your hand if it's stuck here. Yeah, about all you can do is scratch your chest. I noticed pretty early on that most of the stuff that you do with your hands goes on out here, out in front of you. And so I wanted to get that motion back. Of course, I had almost no motion, and one of the first things I did, and it's a good thing to do, was I drew the circles. It's an active version of the pendulum. If you have no motion at all, there's an exercise called the pendulum. Since the last time we talked about this, I actually found a video on how to transition from an inactive to active, from a pendulum to circles. So I can post that down below in the comments. So that's some of my experience and how I dealt with it. I did a lot of pulling on various types of bands, trying to get once I got going, trying to get all those different motions back, going this way, going that way, pushing, pulling, going up, pulling down. There's a lot of different motions your shoulder makes, and that was just keeping the arm straight. You did one earlier, William, when you move with your elbow bent. Anyway, I didn't, I guess I had an occupational therapist, and I ran some of the stuff that I was doing by her, and I asked her about different things I could do with the bands. If you're going to do stuff in the early days like that, one of the things I would highly recommend is getting one of those door anchors, because if you put a door anchor there, you can put it up high and pull down. You can put it down low and pull up. You can put it along the side at any height. Best $5 you can spend. So those are some of the techniques that I used. Circles to get going. I did weight bearing, of course, because that's telling your shoulder telling your brain you want to use your shoulder. So those are some of the things. I've probably got some more as we keep talking, but one of the things you want to do is talk a little bit about how to address the situation, if it's happened to you. When you did the beginning of your explanation, I thought I was thinking, sounds a lot like an AFO. You don't want to get stuck in an AFO and a sling. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your thoughts on addressing the situation if it started to happen or happened to you?
Yeah, sure thing, Ralph. So before I get into that, I just want to highlight, everything you've just shared with the people watching. So it sounds like in your experience, you were actively taking preventive measures to get into a situation where your arm was stuck to your body. And I just want to reiterate this to everyone watching, that, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to depend on the sling to help support the weight of your arm or your shoulder. It should be your brain's job to re-educate itself on how to send those signals through to your shoulder, which are responsible for supporting the weight of your arm. And the way that you do this is by making sure that you maintain that range in your shoulder as soon as possible after you've had your stroke. And you can do this by obviously doing some of the exercises which Ralph mentioned, making sure that you do some weight bearing on your shoulder by yourself. So for example, this might be if you're in an advanced stage and you're really interested, it could be doing a plank on the floor and using your affected arm to support the weight of your body. It could be something like even something as simple as placing your arm over a pillow if you're sitting in the hospital bed and you're waiting for your physical therapist to come collect you. These are all things you can do to actually teach your brain to move away from relying on the sling, something external to help support the weight of your arm, and encourage your arm to not stay in a fixed position like this, but rather move away towards a position where you're actually able to use it because it's not stuck close to your body. And I think that's the most important message to really take to heart when it comes to, avoiding the mistake of the arm sling. Because although the arm sling is always often prescribed by occupational therapists and physical therapists with good intentions, if you overuse it, just like anything in recovery after stroke, you're not actually educating the brain on how to do things or do stuff which you used to do before you had a stroke. For example, being able to send those signals to turn on and off muscles properly. So you have to, I think the primary focus is obviously on educating your brain to do things which you used to do before your stroke without relying on something external to help you get by and help you do it for you, for your brain. So what happens if you're in a situation where maybe you haven't had the fortune of not being able to stretch out your arm in the early days, and maybe you've relied on the arm sling a little bit too much, and you find yourself in a situation maybe a couple of years in your recovery after stroke where your arm is coming a little bit close to your body, and you find that it's really hard to stretch out your arm away from your body. And in some cases, it's extremely painful. Well, in these scenarios, the first thing you've got to do, if you're serious about actually getting back more use out of your hand so that you can actually integrate it in your daily life, is the most important thing to focus on is stretching out the muscle which is used, which has been conditioned to bring your arm in close to your body. So for most people, this is your chest muscle or your pec muscle. Because of overuse of the arm sling, what tends to happen is that your brain tends to send too many signals to the muscles which use to bring the arm in close to your body. And because that muscle isn't stretched out, your brain doesn't know how to relax it enough so that you can actually move your arm away from your body. So the first thing I would suggest that you focus on is teaching your brain how to relax that muscle by stretching it out. And you can stretch it out by doing simple exercises such as putting your arms behind your head. You could use something like a golf putter to help you stretch out your arms. So for example, that would look something like this. So I have a golf putter here, and I know Ralph, you have some exercises as well, where you just place the golf putter in your hand like this, and you just push away from your body, and by doing this, you're actually stretching your arm away from your body, and you're allowing your brain to get back that range of motion in your shoulder so that you can actually use your arm. So I think that's the first thing to consider when it comes to actually helping to troubleshoot or address a situation where you might be a stroke survivor and you find that your arm is coming a little bit close to your body and it's preventing you from actually being able to do things with your hand. Let's say if you can actually do stuff with your hand, but you just can't get your shoulder away from your body in order to apply some of those movements you've got them back in your hand. Now, having said that, the second thing I would also suggest is probably have a discussion with your physiatrist or your neurologist about the possibility of getting Botox injections. And the reason why I say this is because what Botox can do is it can actually paralyze the muscle which is used to bring your arm in close to your body so that it's no longer receiving signals from the brain, which is making that muscle really tight and unable to relax. And what this does is it gives you a small window of time to actually strengthen up the muscles which you use to bring your arm away from your body, so that once the Botox wears off, then your arm will be in a more open position, and the muscles which you use to bring your arm away from your body, they will be strong enough to overcome the muscle which is used to bring your arm close to your body, like so. And any tightness which overuse of the arm sling might have caused in the past. Now, so those are some of the things I wanted to cover for those folks who might have been in a situation where their arm is a little bit close to their body, and they might find that this is stopping them from living a better quality of life. And earlier on, Ralph, you and I, we were having a discussion about some of the exercises which you used, and I know you mentioned some already, to, I guess, maintain that range of motion in your shoulder, in your recovery after stroke. I was just wondering if you want.
Sure. Says our internet connection is unstable. Well, I used a dowel a lot. Eventually, I used it to push up. But in the beginning, I used it to kind of get my affected hand left up. If it won't go up as high, one thing you do, I should have my dowel or a stick here. One of the things you can do with your strong hand is you can tilt it, and that will help raise your other hand when this is weak. Now when you do that, you want to be thinking about lifting it. I found that with everybody I work with, somewhere around level is you hit around level and it's a stopping point, and there's a way to get around it. We'll have to talk about that in another one. But one thing you can do is if you were trying to learn how to punch out, which is a good motion to do, you can take your strong hand and tilt it out. That'll tend to push that hand out, so you can assist going up or down or in and out with a stick or a dowel. I have a video I can post where I kind of like a joke, because I think too many people let road blocks get in their way. I did a video where I found 5 things around my house, and so I would highly recommend buy a $5 dowel along with that $5 door anchor. So, well, the point here to me was I saw something that shocked me. I learned about posturing. No matter whether I did it as efficiently as possible or not, don't know, but I immediately tried to focus on it and fight that pattern, make sure that I got it away from my body. And that's what you should do too. And if you're getting released from physical therapy and you're in a sling, it's like an AFO. You should ask, how do I get out of this thing, and have a plan. So I think a lot of people I see, sometimes they run out of insurance, they're wearing the sling. They think they should wear it forever. I don't know why. Or they think you should wear it all the time. I got rid of mine after a bit. I had some pain, but I would try and support the arm other ways and take a little bit of the pain in order to not have to get in and out of that sling all the time, because that was no fun by yourself. And be free regularly during the day to be able to try and build up the range of motion again. So, you have anything else, William?
Yeah, I think the last thing I want to add is, for all of you stroke survivors who might be curious, when you are ready to get off the sling, I just want to let you know that the way to know if you're ready to get off the arm sling is if you can actually lift your arm above 90 degrees or at least 90 degrees when you're standing up, just like Superman would. And that's how you know that you're ready to graduate from the sling. And it's really important to graduate as soon as you hit that point, unless, of course, like I said, you're a fan of wearing the sling around and having your arm close to your body for the rest of your recovery after stroke. So for all of you who are watching our discussion here today about the shoulder, I just think, it's important in recovery after stroke, obviously, to be cognizant about, let's say if you are prescribed an arm sling, how often you are using the sling, and rather than relying on the sling all the time to support the weight of your shoulder and taking a preventive approach in your recovery after stroke, be aware that where the rubber meets the road is actually how you educate your brain on how to send those signals like it used to before you had a stroke, so that it can learn how to support the weight of your arm just like you did before you actually had a stroke. And so you can live a higher quality of life in your recovery after stroke and also get to your best possible recovery as well.
Right. Well, and when it's in the sling, there's no movement signals going to the brain. In fact, the opposite's going on. When you don't move something, that's the thing about weight bearing and the beauty of weight bearing and things like, wax on, wax off, even if you're teeny tiny motions and jerky, anytime you use it, you're telling your brain you want to use it. And anytime you've got it stable, like in a sling, you're basically telling your brain you don't want to use it. So that was it for me. And like I said, I took a little bit of pain. I thought the getting it out of the sling was too much trouble for all the shoulder work I was doing, because I did it 2, 3, 4 times a day. Did hand, shoulder, and walking. So I got to it several times a day and wanted to be putting that sling off and on. I didn't know anything about the sling trap. It's actually not a trap. There's nothing wrong with slings. It's got to do with how often you wear it and how interactive you are with your therapist and how long your insurance lasts. It's just a clever title, avoid the sling trap. So avoid the sling trap.